Bonsoir à tout le monde et bienvenue à la troisième édition de l'Apéro DeFi. Donc, ça fait partie des plans d'activités de l'Institut des cryptoactifs qui va être inauguré le 8 novembre Paul Léonard da Vinci à la Défense. Ça, c'est un événement en collaboration avec le pôle Innovation Finance qui nous auberge ici au Palais Brognard. Et ce soir, on a le plaisir d'accueillir Jean Barthélemy de la Banque de France et Sylvain Carré, Paris-Dauphine. Donc, Jean va nous parler d'un problème de stablecoins. Donc, c'est un sujet très intéressant et vivace et d'actualité. Disons, en lien avec le crédit à court terme, donc en particulier les commercial papers. Et Sylvain Carré va nous parler d'un problème qu'il va décrire tout à l'heure. For question of audience will be delivered in English, so please, I'll give the floor to John.
Okay, so I'm going to present a joint paper with Paul Gardin and Benoît Nguyen. Both were former colleagues from Banque de France, but now they are at the ECB. So once again, the usual disclaimers apply, and the opinions expressed here do not necessarily reflect the view of our respective institution. Okay, so I will be quick in the introduction because I have already said a lot about this environment. Okay, here that's just, so I will focus mainly between 2020 and mid-2022. So sorry, because that's a bit old now, but you will understand why. Or I can already say it to you. It's because during this period, stablecoins, old commercial papers, and what I will show you and try to convince you is that we can detect some impacts of these holdings by stablecoin issuers on commercial paper market, which is a key market for the financing of enterprise or firms in the US. Okay, so here that's just to mention that stablecoins, so that's in yellow here. It doesn't work, but you see here, that's a relatively small amount compared to the overall market. Okay. If I zoom here, you see that most of the stablecoin in terms of market capitalization are due to Tether in green and to USDC in red. Here, this decrease corresponds to the crash of Terra and Luna. So just to give you a number, at the beginning of 2020, the market cap of asset-backed stablecoin was around 5 billion. Less than 2 years after, it was $150 billion. And these stablecoins are backed. And if they are backed, that means that they buy something. So it means that in 2 years, you have a new class or new category of investor, okay, that enter the market and buy, and I will show that they buy commercial paper. And the very naive question we want to ask here is whether we can detect the impact of this new class of investor. And the answer is yes. Okay, here, that's just to give you the asset composition of Tether or USDT, so the issuer of USDT, Circle, the issuer of USDC, Binance, or the part that corresponds to the issuance of Binance USD. And here, just for comparison, that's the largest prime money market fund in the US, JP Morgan Prime Money Market Fund. And in red here, you see the share of the portfolio in commercial paper or certificate of deposit. And you can see that, okay, it corresponds, it broadly corresponds to the standard composition of prime money market funds like JP Morgan prime money market funds. And this was a big surprise for the market because nobody anticipated the holding of commercial papers by stablecoin issuers. Okay. And the first report that we have is from mid-2021. And even these reports, some have doubts about the quality of this report. So we can't completely rely on what they say. They are not regulated. That's a mess. But that's what they say. That's what they say. Okay. And what we want to assess is whether this holding, the fact that you have a new player buying a lot of commercial papers in just a couple of years, had an impact on the commercial market. Here, that's just to make the point, to really make the point that this new class of investor is large. Here, that's from JP Morgan. That you see the largest holdings of CP and CD among prime money market funds. And in blue here, you have teaser. Okay, that's not money market funds, but that's just to give you, to show you that this new player is large. Recently on X or the old Twitter, the CTO of Circle, I think, said, "Oh, we are as stablecoin issuers the 16th largest holders of U.S. Treasury." That's huge. That's more than Germany. Okay, that's something. So, and why is it important? It's important because it means that you have a new player, okay, that affects the market, and this new player is due to this production of stable digital asset. So if you want to think about the optimal design of this stable digital asset, you have to think about the asset composition, because it may have impact on the financing of the real economy. Okay, just to mention, is it obvious that because you have a new class of investor, it affects the market? No. No, it's not so obvious, because money has to come from somewhere. Okay, so you have dollar inflows into these stablecoin issuers, but these dollars were invested in somewhere before. So if you think that this money comes from money market funds with the same asset composition as stablecoin issuers, then you can think that it is completely neutral. And what we show is that it's not neutral. Okay, so I skip. Yes, please.
Just to clarify, I'm not a specialist in the commercial paper market, but is there a certain stability of the demand of this kind of financing in the short term, or this market is quite stable in terms of demand?
No, this market varies a lot. And there are, in fact, there are already papers, academic papers, showing that this market is able to absorb very large shift in the demand for, let's say, safe asset. And that's what we will show.
So if you compare the new player, compare with the size of the global commercial market, which is the order of magnitude?
It's 4%. It was at the peak 4%. So it's small, but it's a shock. Okay, and I think that it is an exogenous shock. You know, as an economist, I need to motivate and to show that it is really a causal effect. But here, we can argue that it is very unrelated to the CP market, and it is an exogenous shock on the market, on the CP market. So it's not huge, okay, but that's what we have. Okay, so what we do is that we don't rely on infrequent and somewhat controversial attestation reports. What we do is to look at the blockchain data, and look at changes in the relevant tokens. Okay, the changes that corresponds to a change for the issuer, okay, of stablecoin. So if you want, that's the liability side of stablecoin issuers. Because if you try to defend a peg, it means that you have to be fully elastic to the demand. Okay, so Tether or Circle has to absorb any type of shocks, upward or downward. Okay, and this is not under their control. That's the demand, and that's the exogenous shocks that we will use. And what we will do is to use the circulating tokens, the tokens that are backed, okay, and that are due to the demand from the market, and we will see the impact on the CP market. And if we see an impact, it is the proof that effectively they hold some CPs. I can't confirm or infirm the quantity of CPs they have. That's impossible given the data I have. But at least I can say that when they said we hold CP and when they said we don't hold CP, that's exactly when I see an impact and when I don't see an impact. That's what I can say. Okay, so what I use is circulating tokens as an exogenous shock to this particular market, the CP market. Okay, so stablecoin issuers can mint or burn tokens, but circulating tokens are those that are declared to be backed and are determined by the inflow of dollars towards stablecoin issuers. And stablecoin issuers can't do nothing about that. They just receive dollars or not, and then they can buy with these dollars some assets. So what we use is the demand for stablecoin, like as an instrument, if you want, and that's what we think is exogenous to the CP market. And we think that it is exogenous to the CP market because we think that the demand for stablecoins come from the development of the DeFi, from the development of the crypto market in general. Can't depend on CP rates because stablecoin do not pay interest, at least not by the issuers. Then you have lending platforms, but the interest rate on these lending platforms come from very different mechanisms and are, as far as I know, not related to the CP market. And we also confirm our findings using time and cross-sectional change in reserve asset policy. Welcome. Okay, that's just a picture. Of course, that's not a proof, just a correlation. But here you see stable coins, circulating tokens. Okay, that's the x-axis, and the y-axis corresponds to CP issuance. And we can see that okay, there is a upward sloping curve. Okay, but maybe there are confounding factors, and we have to control for them. Okay, and that's the reason of having an econometric exercise. So we do econometrics. Okay, so we have a regression following the literature, and what we do is that we regress change in the issuance of commercial paper, and we regress that on the change in tokens, stablecoin tokens in circulation. And if we see here that it is 0, it means that there is no effect whatsoever of stablecoin on the CP market. If it is positive, it means that when you have an increase in the circulating tokens of stablecoin, it leads to an increase in the issuance of commercial paper. And we control for many things. We control for some determinant of the liquidity in the market, especially because that's during the COVID crisis. So we have also to control for the Fed's program during the COVID crisis. We can also exclude the COVID crisis sample, and our result remains. And we also control for weekday fixed effect, because the commercial paper market is very seasonal, intra-week seasonal. So we have to include this kind of fixed effect. Okay, here's that just the issuance of CP that answer your question. So you see that it moves a lot. You have a high frequency change, okay, and you have also trend, okay. We also try to detrend this data to verify that our results do not come from a common trend and so on. Okay. Yes.
Of course, when you regret something, it's important to understand what is really observable, what is just a proxy. And the choice of the proxy is crucial in the quality of your results. So can you discuss on that? Because I read the paper, and there is some proxy taking, for example, the delta tokens, no?
Okay. Okay, I will come back to that in one slide. This is this one. Okay, so thank you for your question. I like this kind of question. No, okay, so we have to be very careful about the delta token here, the proxy for the change in the demand for stablecoin. Why? Because that's not all tokens that are backed, and Tether or Circle can issue as many tokens as they want. Okay, they are in monopoly in their market. So what we take here is effectively tokens that are outside the ring of Tether or Circle. And to do that, we look at blockchain data. So, and we have to understand how they proceed. So what they do, they have a multi-signature smart contract, okay, that is used to mint and burn new tokens. Okay, so at this, you have the number in the paper you can find, and you can look at Etherscan. That's just for Ethereum blockchain here. Okay, that's the net flows that correspond to these arrows, and they send when they mint, except the first two mint, okay, which correspond to here. Otherwise, when they mint, they send the token to Tether Treasury. It is this address. And then, if you ask a Tether token, you have to send the money, to send dollar, okay, to a bank account owned by Tether Limited. And then Tether will send you a token. Okay, that corresponds to this amount. And because maybe you know that Bitfinex and Tether, that's more or less the same entity. So they use a lot Bitfinex as a bridge to send their token. So sometimes they send the token to Bitfinex, and then Bitfinex send the token to somebody else. Okay. And okay, so you can see that they can try to cheat a bit, but it's not so easy. And especially if you think about it, as soon as it is outside these two addresses, supposedly it has to be backed. Okay. And if we find a result, a positive result, that's because more or less our proxy is not so bad. Because they can't cheat, they can't say, they can't create mechanisms through which they affect a market without affecting the market. So that would be otherwise they have a good technology to make profit. Okay, so our definition of circulating tokens corresponds to any token outside these two addresses. Okay. So as soon as a token comes back to one of these addresses, we consider that it is not backed anymore. Okay. Sometimes you can find different definition depending on the provider of data, CoinMarketCap, CoinGecko, whatever. They have all different definitions. And that's a problem of having a poor regulation, is that we are sometimes a bit lost in the proper definition. Okay, so we use Messari data, but we also construct our own data to check whether the result is robust. Okay, and that's the benchmark result. Okay, here, that's for different maturity bucket or for different issuer or rating. And here you see the impact of a change, perfect, a change in circulating tokens of USDT or USDC, how it affects one of these market category of commercial paper. And obviously, it doesn't affect any maturity bucket or issuer class. But overall, you can see that the number is large and significantly different from 0. Okay, but if you look here, that corresponds to the standard deviation. So the standard deviation is very large. Okay, if you multiply by 2, which is the standard thing, or 1.8, or depending on the threshold you want to do, you will see that it's not so close to 0. So in terms of accuracy, that's very bad. So I can't pretend to have a very nice elasticity. I have to be honest. But we can exclude, the hypothesis of 0 impact. That's what we can do. And we have many robustness checks. Okay, we include, we control for money market funds. We look at the dynamics of the impact. We look whether there is an asymmetry between positive and negative shock, and we find a very different impact depending on the side of the change in tokens. So overall, and if you look at the confidence interval here, we can't exclude the fact that we find exactly the share of CP they said they hold.
How does the double star cope with the level of R square?
Oh, there is no link, between R star and the stars. So the stars tell you something about the significativity of a parameter, of a coefficient. And here the R square corresponds to the share of variance that you can explain. So sometimes you find a very good explanatory variable which is close to 0. Sometimes you have the reverse. Here I'm not able to say whether this is a good or bad R square, especially because I have controls variables. Okay, so certainly, for example, weekday fixed effect matters a lot for this R square. Okay, so I don't pretend to explain a large share of variation of commercial paper. What I can tell you is that we can't exclude the fact that there is an impact on the market. And there is an impact on the issuance. But we do not find any impact on commercial paper rates. Here you see, we see close to 0 stars, if you want. The only one here and here are negative. The coefficients are negative, meaning that when we see an increase in the tokens in circulation, it corresponds to a decrease in the, here that's a spread vis-a-vis the overnight interest rate with the same maturity, okay? But here, when it's negative, it means that it reduces this spread, okay, between the CP rate and the risk-free rate, proxied here by OIS. And so it's sometimes negative, but here it means that $1 billion increase in stablecoin leads to something like 0.4 basis point decrease in CP rate. Nothing. Okay, nothing, really nothing. So what does it mean? We find a positive impact on the issuance, but no impact on rates. It means that the supply of commercial papers is strongly price elastic. When they look at the new demand, they cater to the additional demand completely. And there is no price effect. And that's something that have been already documented using different experiences, that this market, it has been done also in France. And we find, so Perignon et al. Find similar result. So we see that this market is able to cater to additional demand very quickly and we don't see any effect on the interest rate. Okay, so basically it means that the CP market is able to absorb shocks like this. Okay, so to confirm that, we use the fact that USDC and USDT, or Circle and Tether, have stopped abruptly or smoothly to hold commercial papers. And that's why I stopped my sample in mid-2022, because afterward, they have zero holding of commercial papers. So it's some kind of natural experiment. Before they held commercial paper, then they stopped. We can see whether it changed my coefficient in 5 minutes. And here, okay, I just reported the coefficient of interest. What you can see is that for USDT here and for USDC, so USDT, we don't know exactly because they are not so transparent, but they said on Twitter, for example, that they have smoothly stopped buying CP, and at the end of 2022, they have no more CP. Okay. And what we see is that we see a significant impact up to the last semester of 2021, and nothing significant afterwards. For USDC, we see that the impact stopped completely after mid-2021, and it corresponds to what they announced. They announced that in summer, or I think that it's in August 2021, they said they stopped completely to buy and to hold CP. And we see effectively that there is no more impact. So it's just a confirmation that we are effectively we are testing effectively this mechanism through the asset composition of stablecoin issuers and not something else. Okay, so we can also test another stablecoin like Binance USD, because they don't hold and they never hold, they never held commercial paper. And if you do the same regression, you find no significant impact. Okay, you can also use euro-denominated CP, because we know, they say they don't buy them, and we find no effect on euro-denominated CP, which confirms that it is effectively because they held and bought CP that we find an impact. Okay, I skip just to say, okay, here what we have from an academic point of view, if you want, is a plausible exogenous demand shifter to commercial paper market through these changes in circulating tokens and the heterogeneity in reserve asset policy. And our result suggests that the supply curve of commercial paper is vertical in the short run, or very price elastic. We can say that attestation reports by Tether or Circle reflect at least partially the effective backing of USDT, USDC. And more broadly, we think that what we show here, I think that first we are the only paper showing a connection between cryptosphere and traditional finance. And I mean, we can talk a lot about digital finance, but at least this paper shows that there is a connection through the asset side of stablecoin issuers. Maybe there are other channels, but at least we can document this one. And we show that the asset composition matters. And if you think about the optimal design, about whether we need a CBDC or tokenized deposit or stable coins, you have to think a lot about the asset composition and what it means for the financing of the real economy. And not only on financial stability, because in most cases, because we have a lot of literature about financial stability, bank run, and so on, we talk a lot about financial stability. Here, we are not talking, there are implications about financial stability, but we are talking about something else. We are talking about the financing of the economy. If for some reason one of these stablecoins disappears, and it is very easy because you can arbitrage very easily between one or the other, it means that some firms from one time to the other, we'll see funding disappeared. And that means something in terms of rollover risk for the economy. And finally, you can think that, okay, we have ongoing regulation, and that's nice to have them, especially because this market is not so transparent. But if you think of regulation, regulation will displace this mechanism. Maybe this mechanism will not apply to commercial papers, but to the Treasury, of the US Treasury, or in the future, maybe to government bonds in the euro area. But we have to think about the implications of having stable coins or tokenized deposit or whatsoever, or other vehicles backed on specific category. Because if you have large shifts on the liability side, it means something for the financing of the economy. Thank you for your attention. And I hope that Sylvain will have time to discuss and to present his paper.
Remark or comments, some questions from the audience? So waiting for a question, just a remark. Very nice, because you confirm that there is a possibility for a coexistence of traditional finance and decentralized finance. I mean, they are not necessarily exclusive one with respect to the other one. If there are no other questions, we speed up. We go to the next speaker with Sylvain Carré from Apéro DeFi, who is speaking about the possibility to apply the DeFi protocols to the lending market. Please.
Thank you for being here, and for the organizers for giving me this opportunity to present this work with Franck Gabriel from Lyon 1, and I'm from Apéro DeFi. So we have shortened a bit the title to make it a bit more telling. Now it's called Security and Efficiency in DeFi Lending. So what's the broad topic? We are concerned in DeFi, so this is set of applications that have been made possible by blockchain technology. And the idea, as you know, is that we are trying to replicate and maybe improve in some way the main function of banks or exchanges, but in a decentralized fashion, that is by deploying smart contracts on a blockchain. There are mainly two use cases, I would say, at the moment of DeFi, which are automated market makers and lending protocols. This is a paper about lending. So what are two distinguishing features of these lending protocols? First is that if you look at the current practice, virtually all of them are built on proof-of-stake blockchain, and we will see why the consensus mechanism matters. And the second feature is that they rely on algorithmic pricing rule. That is, how much you're going to pay for your borrowing is going to depend on an observable on the protocol and some function that will need to be specified. And so this leads to a supernatural question, which is, well, if I have to develop such an ecosystem, which is using a pricing rule, how should I use my pricing rule, right? So what is an efficient pricing rule? Or if you want to put it in another way, what should be my criterion? What is the welfare criterion that I should strive to maximize with the help of this pricing rule? And an additional twist to our analysis is that we're going to show that in the context of proof-of-stake blockchains, the answer to this question depends also on understanding an interaction with the security of the base layer, so the blockchain upon which the DeFi protocol is built. So I know you're familiar with that, but so that we are all on the same page in terms of terminology and notations, the general representation of a DeFi lending pool will be the following. We have some people with excess liquidity and they want to earn some interest, right, on their tokens. So by tokens, throughout the talk, I will refer to the native crypto of the blockchain. So if you think about Ethereum, it will be simply Ether. And these potential lenders, they supply some liquidity L to the pool. But we don't have a matching between supply and demand as would be the case in a variation market, but instead only a part of those tokens, D, will actually be used by borrowers. And so we can define a utilization rate, which measures the relative pressures of demand and supply of borrowing, which is this D divided by L. And a pricing rule will then specify a mapping between this observable U and the actual interest rate on borrowing that will prevail. And so, if you look at so what are the main DeFi lending protocols that we have in mind? You can think of Aave and Compound, for instance. If you go on their websites and you look at their doc, they have, of course, white papers that specify which F they use, which optimal utilization they want to target, but there is no economic rationale behind it. In other words, they draw it out of a hat, at least for us. Of course, they have probably models in the background, but we don't know what they are trying to maximize, and we don't know where the F that they choose comes from. So this is exactly the topic of the paper. It's to understand, as an economist, what is the rationale behind the choice of such a pricing rule, what is the efficiency criterion, and how to maximize it. So just a preview of the results so that you know kind of where we are going. We will see that we have an analogy between traditional finance and DeFi, in the sense that in our model, we will have a coexistence between a good and a bad equilibrium. In banking, you can have self-fulfilling fears about the solvency of a bank. Here, it will be a self-fulfilling fear about the security of the blockchain. We will have something to say about the optimal level of inflation. What is inflation in the context of a proof-of-stake blockchain? It is generated by the rewards that you grant to the validators. So I will come back on that later. And more importantly, we will have something to say about the efficient pricing rules, so precisely what I was describing before. What can we say about this F function? How should we select it? And finally, in a more general context, we will then restrict to affine rules, but with the benefit that we have a very specific result on their design. So there are several papers with which we connect. I will just mention the main ones. So in terms of modeling, we use the monetarist model of Lagos and Wright that Pagnotta, in his last year RFS paper, also uses in his analysis of Bitcoins. The idea of looking at the trade-off between staking in a proof-of-stake validation mechanism or lending is due to Tarun Chitra, but he has partial equilibrium financial engineering approach, which is completely distinct from ours, and its focus is not so much on efficiency and welfare maximization. In terms of the economic objective, this working paper is the closest to ours. It's actually posterior to our paper, and they re-explore our question of welfare maximum pricing rules in a different context, which notably doesn't have endogenous security. So I'm going to describe the model briefly. If you're not familiar with this Lagos-Wright Klamov model, it's not a big deal because, as we will see, the equilibrium equations that we obtain are all super interpretable. In fact, we could almost obtain them directly. So you can see this as a giant micro foundation exercise, if you want, where there is actually a need for money and so on. So we have discrete time, one real good, and two main classes of agents, which will be maintainers, basically the people who are in charge, quote unquote, of the DeFi protocol, and borrowers who will use the loans provided by this protocol. The maintainers, they are risk neutral. And at each time, you have a new generation that replaces the previous ones. And what is their decision? They have some real good endowments, and they can decide whether, one, they can invest outside of the blockchain, right? And gain some safe interest R0. Or they can say, okay, this looks like a promising investment opportunity. I'm going to convert my real good into the token and try to make money on this DeFi platform. If I decide to own token, I can then either stake them in quantity S. What is the goal of this operation? It is to collect the proof of stake rewards. Or I can decide to lend those. What is the goal of this operation? Is to collect the interest rate on the DeFi protocol. And we're going to assume that the RT are such that we have a constant inflation rate. So you see this rho. How is it defined? Omega plus R is the new supply of tokens after a block reward. Omega is the previous supply, so rho is the gross inflation rate. We can immediately, since they are risk neutral, obtain a simple condition. What is the net return on their activity? If I decide to stake, so I put a quantity S in the staking pool, but there are also other people who are contributing to this pool. And overall, they contribute to a quantity capital S. So the probability that I'm selected by the protocol is S divided by capital S. So my expected net return on this activity will be R divided by capital S. Second activity, lending. There is an interest rate Y on lending, but beware, there is a specificity of the DeFi protocol. Not everything is used. So actually, only a fraction U of the liquidity earns interest. So my net return is actually the utilization rate times the promised rate on borrowing. Now the borrowers, which are even more central to our analysis, as we will see. So those wanted at T, they are going to be subject to a friction, which is that they are slow in the sense that, yes, they can produce the consumption good, but they need time. So basically, they need to plant seeds at time T in a greenhouse, and the fruit will only mature in the greenhouse at the next date. Why do we do this? Because this generates a need from them to purchase the good that they want at date T from someone else. These other guys, which we are going to call sellers, they are passive in the sense that they have no bargaining power, so they will have no utility, so we don't need to mind them. But these sellers, they have the ability to produce the good when the borrowers want it. So what are the borrowers going to do? They need some liquidity, some money, which in our model is the crypto, to purchase this quantity to sellers. So they're going to access the DeFi protocol, borrow the liquidity that they need, transact with the sellers, and finally consume a quantity QT. Okay? How does it work in practice? As you know, in the DeFi protocols, if I want to borrow, let's say, $100 worth of Ether, for instance, what do I need to do? Of course, there will be a risk of default if nothing additional was required. So I need actually to collateralize and even to over-collateralize my borrowing. So I will need to post, for instance, $140 worth of USDC. And the idea is that unless there is a jump, basically, in the price process of ETH, this ensures that there will always be a timely liquidation, which is possible, and this makes the loan risk-free. Okay, so that's the goal of over-collateralization. How do we capture this in the model? We're going to assume that the borrowers have the ability to tokenize their production. So remember, they have planted their seeds in the greenhouse, so they can transfer the property rights of the greenhouse on the blockchain and create some decent collateral that will effectively make the loan risk-free, as is essentially the case in practice. So in the end, what is the utility of borrowers? They get some happiness from consumption that they derived from their purchase, but they also need to plant the seeds and basically to produce the good and then post the collateral. So this creates this effort term ET. A key element and novelty of the model is that we are interested in an endogenous security channel. What is our idea is that the likelihood that the chain fails is not completely out of our control. It depends on the value of the staking pool. So what is this P times S? S is the amount of token staked. P is the price of such a token, which is endogenous as well. So if you think that the maintainers, they are honest, so they want the blockchain to perform its intended function, but you could have outsiders, which for some reason, maybe ideological, political, or others, want to perform an attack on the blockchain. What do they need to do in a proof of stake environment? They need to acquire a large fraction of this pool. Okay, if I own, for instance, 50% of the pool, it means that half of the time I will be selected by the mechanism to validate the next block, and then I can go crazy, censor transactions, perform double spending attacks, and so on, and basically destroy the trust and usability of the blockchain. So all this means that it makes sense to consider that the survival probability of the chain is an increasing function of the market value of the stake tokens. And what is the simplest increasing function of something is simply to put a coefficient lambda in front of it, positive. And then, of course, it's a probability, so it's capped at 1. Another advantage of this approach is that we can now define the analogous of what in traditional finance we can define a bank fundamental. It is the value of the assets that are backing the deposits, right? So here it's different. But what is the intrinsic fundamental of the blockchain? It is this parameter lambda, right? It tells us how, at the margin, I will react to an increase in the market value of the stake tokens. Utilization and rate and pricing rules, I have already defined them in the picture. So U is D divided by L. And for simplicity for the talk, you can consider that the pricing rule is linear. So we have a base rate, A, a constant, plus a linear term in the utilization. What does it produce? Well, it produces by construction, given that A and B are positive rates, which are increasing in the utilization rates, which makes sense because it means that if I have more demand for borrowing, the rates should be higher, kind of intuitive. I will let you know when I present the results when and when not we actually need this assumption of affine rules. So as I said, now we arrive to the equilibrium conditions, and you will see that you can understand them independently. So this is simply saying that my expected return of lending is the same as my expected return on staking. We already discussed that. The second equation is important. Because we see that the security, the endogenous security, pops up right in different conditions. What is this R0? Remember, it is what I gain as a maintainer if I invest outside of the blockchain. Now we need just a few seconds to understand this term. If I decide inside to be a DeFi investor, I enter the blockchain, I have one token, then it will bear an interest of U times Y. But beware, if the chain crashes, this is no longer valuable, right? Because the blockchain is destroyed. And so this will actually be worth something with probability G, which is the security of my chain. And finally, I need to divide by rho, because rho is the inflation rate, so I need to convert this into real terms. This we can skip. The only thing that matters, and this is Micro 101, once we do the maximization program of borrowers, obviously we will find that their utility decreases in the borrowing rates that they face. Nothing new here. And so we can list our equilibrium equations. The two first pertain to the indifference condition of maintainers. I just explained them, two very basic pricing equations. The second one pertains to the maximization of borrowers. The third one is the key endogenous security channel that we have that will map the properties of the staking pool to a security level. And the last one is simply telling us that as long as the blockchain is not subject to an attack, the price will decrease at deterministic rates. This is very standard in these models and it's very intuitive. It means when there is no attack, the situation at t, t+1, t+2 is the same every time. So there is no reason to think that the total value of the tokens should change. This is a simple quantity of theory of money view. So basically, if there are twice more ethers and no other factors that change, then the value should be divided by 2. And we will say that the platform is viable if there is an equilibrium. You could say, well, but it's messed up. Why would there be no equilibrium? Well, if the investing on the blockchain is not attractive enough for maintainers, they are just going to invest outside, and basically no loans will be provided to borrowers. And so it means that we have tried to design a protocol that helps people to borrow, but we have failed. Before I jump into the results, two important benchmarks. The first one is, if we didn't have this algorithmic rule, but instead a Valrajan auctioneer, as we learn in textbooks, what would happen? Would we be better off or not? So this is captured in the model. It corresponds to a utilization of 1 supply. So the liquidity supplied L equals the demanded tokens D. Note that this corresponds to a maximal rate of A plus B times U, but U is 1, so A plus B. This will be useful in a minute. Second key benchmark, what did we learn, or what will we learn by connecting this security to the staking pool? Maybe we would have obtained similar results with a simpler approach, simply saying that the security of the blockchain is exogenous. So it's important to be able to compare what happens with an exogenous security and what happens with our endogenous security channel. So at the beginning, I told you that our goal is to understand what is the motivation behind the design of some pricing rules. And so if I say motivation, it means that I have an objective to maximize in mind. Here, the nice thing with a general equilibrium model with homogeneous beliefs, this is very important as well. It's not a paper about speculation. If you have homogeneous beliefs, you can define properly a measure of welfare that you want obviously to maximize. What is the measure of welfare? We have two things. The first thing is for the current generation, maintainers and sellers, their utility is not impacted by construction, by the choice of the parameters. So the only guys who are impacted are the borrowers. And as I said, the highest the Y, the lower the utility. But it's not only about the current generation, it's also about whether the protocol will be able to provide loans in the future. And it will only be able to do so in case the blockchain did not fail. So the second matrix is the security level G. And we do not wish to have any assumption regarding what is more important, is it the present or the future. So we are agnostic. We say that a design is efficient if we cannot simultaneously increase security and decrease the borrowing rates. And now we want to characterize these efficient designs. First result, which is more a sanity check than a result in itself, it is just what is going on if I first switch off the security channel. If I switch it off, I only have a set of very simple equations. So if my model is at least to some extent well designed, I should find something simple. It is indeed the case. What do we find? The rates, so A plus B, remember, is the maximal rate I can ever earn as a lender on this protocol. If this rate is too small, obviously, compared to the outside option, I'm not going to enter and the protocol is not viable. Nothing deep here. But if this is satisfied, then we have a unique equilibrium. So all the quantities are defined without any ambiguity. And this is an important building block to arrive to what matters for us, which is the equilibrium when there is a mapping between the security and the properties of the staking pool. We obviously still have this condition, but we have a key novel condition, which tells us that this lambda, which is the fundamental, as I said, the analogous of a bank fundamental in traditional finance, must be larger than some endogenous threshold that we find explicitly in the paper. So it tells you that you have to make sure that your chain is intrinsically sufficiently robust, right? And you may not always be able, by just adjusting the rewards, for instance, for lending or the pricing rule parameters, you may not be, if this lambda is too small, you may not be able to provide sufficient incentives for your protocol to work, okay? Because of the endogenous security. And another contrast with the case of exogenous security is that we now have typically two equilibria, a secure one and a risky one. Just like in banking, we have a possibility, like in Diamond Deep Vig, of people panicking and effectively destroying the bank as a self-fulfilling prophecy. Here, the self-fulfilling prophecy is, I'm scared that the blockchain is not secure, and therefore, indeed, it is not secure. All right. So now we have characterized exactly when our protocol is going to work and when it is not going to work. And we have seen that, critically, we have a novel constraint to take into account. Now, we are going to go to the question that I announced in the beginning. What is an optimal design of this system? The first variable we can look at, but it's not the most important, is the inflation rates. So inflation is generated by the fact that there are rewards that are injected and given to the successful validators of proof-of-stake blocks. So what can we say about the optimal level of this thing? We can start from a trivial case, which is when there is absolutely no rewards. Then, obviously, no incentives to stake, no security, no viability. Very good. But then you could say, okay, but then it means that I need to be careful and have a sufficient amount of rewards, because otherwise, by the same reasoning, there will not be enough staking and the protocol will collapse. However, this in general is not true, because you could remember that the incentives to stake, they are not just proportional to the reward R, but they also depend on the size of the pool of other stakers you are competing with. So it's R divided by S. So if security was exogenous, you could very well have a system that works properly with very, very, very small block rewards. But here you see me coming. It is not possible because if the staking pool is very small, then I will be subject to attacks. And so we can prove that and define explicitly a minimum level of inflation, right, which is strictly positive, such that which is required for the DeFi protocol to actually work. And in fact, but I will skip this for the interest of time, we show that there is no point in going further. So it means that we uniquely characterize the amount of rewards that should be given in this proof of stake system. Why don't I spend more time on this? It's because I think it makes sense to consider that this row, since it depends on the block rewards, is a characteristic of the base layer. So it's decided essentially when Ethereum is constructed, right? But it's not a property of the layer one, so of the protocol which is built upon the blockchain. So in practice, the lever that people are going to be more likely to have are these parameters of the pricing rule, as I announced in the beginning. Okay, so maybe I want to create a new protocol and I want to be competitive. Therefore, I want to know what is best for my customers, and so I need to decide how I set my pricing rules. Or maybe if the regulators start to want to intervene in this kind of things, they may also want to have their own models to say, okay, your A and B are not good for welfare of customers. You could improve, and I impose that you do this and that in terms of your pricing rule. So this is the actual design instrument. How to do? So this is the comparative statistics result I will detail the most in terms of economic intuition, because I think it's at the heart of what we look at in this paper. We have two results. The first one is that when we are in the risky equilibrium, there exists a threshold. So remember, eta characterizes the curvature of the utility of borrowers. In simple terms, what does it mean? If my eta is very large, it means that I'm super eager to consume and I will borrow no matter what. If eta is small, it means I'm basically chilling. And so if it's too expensive to borrow, I don't borrow. Okay? So what do we find? In the first case, when eta is large, we find that security decreases when the pricing rule parameter increases. Let me just put this result into the context of an actual debate. So I mentioned in the beginning the paper of Chitra, who was, so he's actually a guy, if you don't know him, who was working for Gauntlet. And Gauntlet, they are one of the firms that advise Compound in how they fix the pricing rules. And so his concern was that, okay, it's very nice, guys, to think about building DeFi protocols on proof of stake, but you run into a danger, which is if your DeFi protocol is super attractive for what we call maintainers, then they will not stake, okay? And then we will have a security problem, okay? So the root of his paper is to say there is a trade-off between providing lending on the DeFi protocol and having security of a proof of stake blockchain. And so in his partial equilibrium approach, this is what you would find, right? Because he would say A or B increases. It means that if I fix, of course, the demand side, it means that the price of borrowing increases. It's more attractive for a maintainer to put his liquidity into the lending pool. And so they don't put it in the staking pool and the security decreases, okay? And of course, if eta is large, so it means if borrowers are completely eager to consume and to borrow, it's as if the demand side is fixed, and so we are back on this result. However, it can completely revert if we now take the demand side into account. Now, if there is an upward pressure on the price of lending, and that my demand is very elastic, I'm going to say, no, thank you, I don't want to use your protocol anymore, okay? And we will have the opposite effect on maintainers. They will now say, okay, no one wants my liquidity on the lending pool, let me stake, and security increases. That's the broad intuition, okay? And so the big picture message here is that we disagree with Chitra in the sense that in the general case, there is no reason why there should be an antagonism between security and lending in proof-of-stake blockchains. Second point is that utility decreases in the pricing rule parameters. The quick intuition is the following. We know that there must be sufficient incentives for maintainers to jump into this DeFi thing. So the A plus B must be large enough. But once this is the case, they come in, they are compensated correctly. There is no point in increasing the rates further because this will just decrease the borrower's utility. So we combine all this together and we find the main result. Don't worry, I will just show you what is the most important. We arrive to one of the key results of the paper, which is the following. Why is it key? Because it answers our initial question of what is the optimal pricing rule design. We first have an important benchmark. Assume that there is not this endogenous security channel. Then it is what happens is what you would expect to happen if you remember. If we remember our micro classes and welfare theorems, we have learned that in general, if there is no friction, it is optimal to match supply and demand through a Valrasian auction. Okay. So indeed, if I shut down this channel and I have extrinsic security, we find that I should set up my parameters in order to replicate an equality of supply and demand on my lending platform. So this is very reassuring. And in the other working paper that I mentioned, where they don't have endogenous security, in a different model, they also find this result. Okay, but do we have something more to say? We can skip point 1. Point 2 tells us that yes, because we have this endogenous security constraints, it can very well be the case that if I try to implement a utilization of 1, I'm actually violating these constraints, and the blockchain is not sufficiently, is not viable simply. And so the optimal utilization is actually strictly below 1. And this provides, there are several others, I know, and I will discuss one in my last slide, which arrives soon. But this provides one theory for which, as I said, when you go on the documentation of this decentralized platform, they tell you that they view the optimal utilization to be at 80 or 90% typically. This provides one theory for why, because if you increase utilization too much, you can actually have a security problem, okay? So you may have noticed that I'm tricking you, in fact, because I've been talking about these parameters A and B so far completely indifferently. It was you can increase A or increase B. There was no difference between the two. And it was not clear, actually, what was the role of B, for instance. The reason is that, if you think about it, the environment that I described was deterministic in the sense that the outside rate was R0, it was fixed. The strength of the blockchain lambda, it was fixed as well. And so all this leads to understand that I can compute exactly what is the efficient target interest rate that I want to implement. And in the end, it is the only thing that matters is what will be the equilibrium borrowing rates on the protocol. And so there are a myriad of ways of implementing this rate. I could take A directly equal to this rate and B to 0, or A plus BU, or another A plus BU, or a polynomial of order 22 that gives me this same level of rates. Doesn't matter. So there is a good and a bad side to this observation. The good side is that it means that my previous result was independent of, it's not optimal among linear pricing rules, it was optimal among all rules, what I showed you before. That's the good side. The bad side is we can wonder, is this really realistic and flexible enough? What is the problem? In reality, this A and B, which are the properties of the pricing rule, you can adjust them, but very slowly. So you need to have a vote from people who own the governance token, and they can decide to change the protocol parameters, but it takes a long while. And typically the frequency at which they can do it is much, much smaller than the frequency at which we have news about the environment. And the problem is that now if you have some randomness that pops in, the desired interest rate is no longer a constant, right? It's going to be state dependent. And you see immediately the issue. Now, if I have put everything on the A, how do I target a state-dependent interest rate? This is a problem. So we then build an extension where we now assume some randomness of the parameters. We pick the parameter R0 for simplicity. For reasons that I will skip, we now need, unfortunately, to focus, so assume that people do not panic and focus on the good equilibrium. And in this context, since the security is ensured, our problem is simply to maximize the expected utility of borrowers by picking the optimal affine rules of the parameters of our affine rules. And we find the fact that it's always optimal to have A set to 0, which is in line with the intuition I was just giving you. We want maximal flexibility as soon as we have a state contingent target interest rate in this protocol. And thus, it makes no sense to put any weight on A when I could put it on the B, which is multiplied by the utilization rate. And the key difference is that when I have news, then people adjust their behavior and the utilization rate is modified. So in the end, the intuition is quite transparent. And for instance, on protocols such as Aave, I think it's still the case, if I'm not mistaken. This is indeed what they have. So the base parameter of their rule is at 0 exactly. Okay. And so we have a theory for that. In other protocols, it's not exactly the case. So is it because they are trying to provide some incentives for liquidity provision? Is there another rationale? If someone knows, I would be happy to discuss it. But at any rate, we have a clear theory that tells us, with our ingredients, that this constant parameter in the pricing rule does not make a lot of sense, according to us. So I'm concluding now. What have we done in this paper? We have initiated a theory of welfare maximizing pricing rule design. So of course, we rely on a bunch of assumptions, but at least the advantage of our approach is that we have a clear criterion that we try to maximize, and the pricing rule doesn't come out of a hat. We have an analogy between traditional bank runs and this possibly self-fulfilling prophecy on the security of the base layer. We have something to say about inflation, but mostly about what is the efficient interest rate and how to implement it. And we have a precise prediction in the case of parameter uncertainty. To conclude, obviously, there are many ways in which this research can be extended. The first one could be to think about liquidity shocks. So just like if you have a liquidity need, you want your bank to be able to provide you some cash on demand. Similarly here, if I'm a maintainer, I put my liquidity in the DeFi pool. Suddenly, I need my token to do something else. I want to be able to withdraw it from the pool. Okay. If utilization is at 1, it's not possible. So this is another rationale for which we want to maybe have lower utilization rates. And for those of you who are familiar with the protocols, you know that typically their pricing rule is linear in the beginning, and then they have a big kink, and it becomes super expensive to borrow when utilization is large. Okay. So this is, in our mind at least, probably linked to the possibility of liquidity shocks. They want to prevent utilization from being too strong so that it's always possible to gather some tokens from the pool. But to my knowledge, there is no equivalent of our theory or extension of our theory to this case yet. So this is something that we can look at. Finally, we could also introduce fees. So you may have noticed I did not distinguish between, there was no bid-ask spread basically on the DeFi platform for borrowing. What could be the impact of such a bid-ask spread? This is also an interesting question. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So, very speed talk, because we have some time for questions. So, is there anyone who is willing to ask, please?
Thank you very much. So, I had a question about the kink, but you have mentioned it at the end. But if I remember well, there is also a reserve rate on some protocol for management of the risk, and I would like to have your views about the governance of these platforms, whether concentration can be an issue here, and what is this. Okay, here it doesn't appear in the story, so is it important?
So the reserve pool, in fact, things appear jointly. So in the sense that the main goal of the reserve pools in these protocols is to back up additionally the loan. So in case there is some default, you can draw into the reserve pool and pay the person who was going to be defaulted upon with this reserve. So it only makes sense to have such a reserve pool if you have a probability of default. So if you want to have this appear in a model, you would also need to capture this possibility. And it's not so obvious because, as I said, in practice, you already have a safeguard, which is the over-collateralization. So you already have a first layer that protects you from default. So this reserve pool is only used if the first layer of protection doesn't work, typically, as I said, if there is a big jump in the price process, okay? So if we want to model that, and I don't know to what extent the magnitude of this effect, we need to introduce some additional risk on the token, some potential jumps, and be even more careful about the liquidation rules. You know, when you start to break your correlation factor, what do the liquidators do? So your point is important, but it requires kind of a whole new set of tools that needs to be together in the model.
Thank you. Other comments? Or
Thank you very much for the presentation. I have a question on liquid staking and how does this impact your research? You know, in the constraint of having security on one side and borrowing pools on the other side. When you think about Lido or Tezos that enable liquid staking?
I'm not so familiar with this term. Can you be a bit more specific?
It's the fact that you can stake and delegate the staking to maintain the security of the blockchain and at the same time use your tokens to do something.
Yeah. Sorry. Yes, this is a super good question. We are working on a bunch of extensions at the moment. One of them is, so far I've been considering only the native token. So one of our extension is to consider other tokens that will be lent. And the other one is exactly what you are saying. So it's not something we have looked at yet, but we know that it's important.
thank you. Other comments? I've just a curiosity due to my mathematical background is a distortion. You spoke about possible extension. So I understood the linear rule and you told something in terms of, okay, a possible structure which is universal in terms of this kind of linear rule. But you didn't discuss, for example, the role of rho. So the inflation rate was supposed to be constant in order to find the equilibrium or in order to find this particular structure equilibrium.
So yeah, thanks for the question. So the constant rho is simply that we want to have a stationary model, right? And everything else is stationary. And if, for instance, the block rewards are constant, omega grows, but the reward is constant, then the inflation rate decreases. And then all the variables evolve dynamically instead of having something stationary, right? So it could be interesting, but in terms of complexity, it's to the next level. So first order effects will be to have stationarity.
Okay, if there are no other questions, I will, yeah, there is still.
Thank you for the presentation. You mentioned a paper by Chitra. Is it because he's written several papers on the topic? Is it in this paper that he modeled the wealth of a staking pool using a Polia urn? Because if yes, it seems to be that there is a simulation part in his paper. So what is wrong finally in his paper? Because you said that your results did not
it's not, I don't want to say it's wrong. It's just he has an approach which allows to maybe be more realistic in some aspects, but that abstracts from some others. And mostly, it's really partial equilibrium. So it's only looking at what do I do as a maintainer? So someone who has liquidity. Do I want to stake or do I want to borrow? And the demand side is not modeled, right? Or very schematically. So the big difference is that we can capture a simple fact, which is that if the interest rates are moving, maybe the borrowers are also going to change. And there is also a demand side effect. And if you look at his papers, these demand side effects are not captured at all.
Okay, I guess it's time for champagne. So I would like to thank the two speakers of today for your nice presentations. And